Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a company whose stock price just, well, nosedives. We're talking an 85 to 90% drop in just a few months.
Yeah, that's pretty dramatic.
Right. That's the story with Gensol Engineering in 2025. It plummeted from the 900 euro 1,000 range way down to around 120.
Wow.
So if you're trying to stay informed, but you don't want to get buried under, a mountain of news, this kind of thing really makes you ask, why?
Exactly. What happened there?
And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
And what's fascinating, I think, is that this wasn't just like a bad market reaction. There were several things, sort of interconnected issues that led to this huge drop.
Absolutely. And our primary source for this deep dive is actually a recent conversation that gives us a real sort of boots on the ground sense of what's been happening.
Okay.
It touches on SEBI's initial findings, some really substantial financial discrepancies, and how this whole situation is affecting everyone involved.
So it's like getting the inside track without wading through endless reports.
Exactly. Think of it that way. Our mission today is just to pull out the key pieces of this puzzle, understand what it all means, and maybe learn some broader lessons about corporate governance, investor awareness.
Right. Keep it clear, not overly technical.
Precisely. Clarity, not complexity.
So this raises the big question.
Right.
What was the initial trigger? What really set off this massive fall? The conversation points directly to SEBI, right?
Right. The Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, they're the market regulator here, kind of the umpire, and they stepped in with a temporary ban on Gensol Engineering's promoters.
Anmol and Jaggi.
Those are the guys. And getting banned, even temporarily, that's a pretty big deal.
Huge. And the reason? What did SEBI find?
Well, it boils down to a failure to properly account for a huge chunk of loan money. We're talking 262.13 crore.
Out of how much total?
Out of a total of 977.75 crore in loans. So yeah, a significant amount missing, or at least not accounted for.
And connecting that to the bigger picture, that missing 262 crore,
Yeah.
that's not small change. It's a big slice of the funds they had access to.
No kidding. And the immediate consequences for the promoters were quite serious, as you'd expect.
Yeah, the conversation mentions they were removed from director posts.
Exactly. Not only removed from their director positions within Gensol, but also restricted from trading in the stock market. When a regulator like SEBI acts like that, it's a major, major red flag for everyone watching.
And these loans, the nearly 978 crore, the conversation highlights they weren't just general corporate funds, were they? They had a very specific purpose.
That's key. The money came from IRETA and PFC financial institutions often involved in energy and infrastructure projects.
Right.
And it was specifically earmarked for buying 1,700 electric vehicles for blusmart.
Ah, the electric ride-sharing service.
Exactly. It was meant to be a big investment to grow their EV fleet.
But the numbers, as the conversation seems to indicate, just don't add up. There's a big gap between the money allocated and what was actually, acquired.
That's right. Instead of the planned 1,700 EVs, it looks like only around 4,704 EVs actually got delivered.
Okay, wait. 4,704. That's more than 1,700. Is that a typo in my notes or?
Ah, good catch. Let me double check that source detail. Okay, the source material seems a bit ambiguous here between the intended 1,700 and actual 4 to 704. Let's stick with the core financial discrepancy for now. Those vehicles cost about 207 crore.
Okay, so around 207 crore spent on vehicles, but the loans were much larger.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. The conversation suggests a substantial amount, maybe that missing difference, around 207 crore actually was allegedly moved.
Moved where?
By the promoters, it seems, to other companies they were connected to. Go Solar Ventures and Capridge Ventures.
Okay, related entities. That always raises eyebrows.
It does. And what's fascinating here is that it looks like almost 40% of those specific loan funds might have gone to entities with direct links to the people running Gensol.
Which immediately makes you question, conflicts of interest. Was this really for Gensol's benefit, or were the promoters benefiting through these other companies?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or rather, the 200 crore question. And the story takes another turn here.
Oh.
SEBI's findings apparently suggest this diverted money wasn't just, parked in those other ventures. There are indications it might have been used for luxury purchases.
Luxury purchases?
Through what the conversation calls circular transactions.
Ah, okay. Explain that a bit.
Well, think of it like money moving in a circle between different companies, maybe controlled by the same people. It can make it really hard to track where the money originally came from and where it ultimately ended up.
So it obscures the trail. And the concern here is that maybe these transactions were designed specifically to hide what the money was really spent on.
Precisely. And what was it spent on? The conversation mentioned some pretty specific things.
Like what?
Things like a 42 crore luxury flat, a $5 million apartment, even a 30,000 golf set.
Seriously, a golf set.
Apparently. The contrast is, well, it's stark, isn't it? Between the intended use building an EV fleet for a ride-sharing service and this kind of spending.
Yeah, Stark is putting it mildly. That's definitely not what investors sign up for.
Not at all. And these revelations, you can imagine the impact they had on how the market saw Gensol, and crucially, on the value of shares held by regular folks.
Absolutely. That initial stock price crash we talked about?
Yeah, that 85–90% drop in 2025, that kind of fall has a real human cost. The conversation mentions over 1.1 lakh retail shareholders were affected.
Wow, over 100,000 people.
Yeah, these are everyday investors. Many probably had savings tied up, maybe even through SIPs, systematic investment plans.
So people just diligently putting a bit of money away each month into this stock.
Exactly. And then this happens, it would be a massive setback for them.
Understandably. And this kind of situation inevitably attracts more regulatory attention beyond just SEBI, right?
Oh, for sure. The conversation suggests other bodies are looking into it, or might be soon.
Like who?
Well, blusmart, for one. They understandably want to know where the money meant for their EVs actually went, so they launched their own investigation.
Makes sense.
They brought in Grant Thornton, a big, well-known firm, to do a forensic audit.
Okay, so digging deep to trace the funds, like financial detectives.
Pretty much. Following the money trail.
And besides blusmart's audit, any government bodies.
Yeah, the potential involvement of the Corporate Affairs Ministry, the MCA, adds another layer.
Okay.
The conversation mentions a possible probe under various sections of the Companies Act and PFUTP regulations.
PFUTP. Prohibition of fraudulent and unfair trade practices. That sounds serious.
It is. It's aimed squarely at preventing misconduct in the market. And the specific sections mentioned, like 447, 185100, 886, 166 of the Companies Act, they deal with things like fraud, improper related party transactions, and the basic duties of directors.
So the fact that these are even being considered tells you how serious the alleged offenses are.
Definitely. So if these investigations do find wrongdoing under these laws, what kind of legal trouble are we talking about for Gensol and the promoters?
Well, the legal fallout could be pretty extensive. It could potentially impact the very future of both Gensol and blusmart. The conversation touches on the possibility of IBC proceedings. That's the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code.
Ah, right. The framework for when companies can't pay their debts.
Exactly. So litters like PFC and IRETA, who are still owed that 262 crore.
Yeah, the unaccounted for amount.
They might file cases in the NCLT, the National Company Law Tribunal. It's a special court for company law stuff, including insolvency. Their goal would be simple: get their money back.
Okay. And if that happens, what about Gensol's assets? Like the EVs they did manage to buy?
That's a crucial point. If IBC kicks in, those EVs, whether it's 3,000 or that 4,704 figure, could become assets under resolution.
Meaning they could be sold off to pay the creditors?
Potentially, yes. Which would obviously directly hit blusmart's operations and, the drivers who rely on those vehicles for their livelihood. It gets complicated fast.
Wow. So beyond the sheer financial and legal mess, this whole thing really throws a spotlight on some pretty significant failures in how Gensol Engineering was actually being run, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Governance failures seem central here. The resignation of those independent directors, Harsh Singh and Kuljit Palply. That's a big one.
Why are independent directors resigning so significant?
Because they're supposed to be the objective watchdogs, providing oversight of management. When they resign, especially citing governance concerns, it's often a sign of really deep problems with leadership and internal controls.
Got it. So their departure is a major red flag. And we also saw the promoter's own stake in the company plummet, right, down to just 2.4%.
Yeah, which suggests either a massive loss of confidence or maybe even a forced reduction because of everything going on, or both.
And there were credit rating downgrades, too.
Due to liquidity risks, basically. Concerns about whether Gensol could even meet his short-term bills. That just underlines how precarious their financial position became.
And didn't they freeze a stock split as well?
They did. Which might seem technical, but a stock split can sometimes make shares feel more accessible, boost liquidity a bit. Freezing it amid all this trouble just adds to the negative sentiment, and it can affect the voting power smaller shareholders might have gained.
Right, and maybe the most worrying governance issue. SEBI reportedly found forged documents.
Yeah, forged conduct letters, apparently, allegedly submitted to try and mislead credit rating agencies and the lenders themselves.
Wow. So, suggesting a deliberate attempt to misrepresent the company's financial health.
If true, yes, that points towards trying to actively deceive the people providing or assessing their finances. That's extremely serious.
So, amidst all this, what has Gensol actually said? What's their official response been?
Well, publicly, the company has stated it's committed to cooperating with the investigations, ensuring compliance, the usual statements.
But actions speak louder than words, right?
Often, yes. And as the conversation notes, that planned board split order and the stock split, they're still on hold because of these ongoing governance issues.
So, it's like they're promising to clean house, but key corporate actions are stalled, suggesting the problems run deep.
Pretty much sums it up.
So, what does the future actually look like for Gensol now? Especially with that shadow of potential IBC proceedings hanging over them?
It's definitely uncertain, very uncertain. If IDC gets triggered, control really shifts to the creditors.
The lenders like PFC and IRETA.
Exactly. They'll be driving the decisions on how best to recover their money. That could mean a major restructuring of Gensol or even liquidation, selling off assets.
Is there any potential upside? Anything Gensol still has going for it?
Well, the conversation does mention their history in solar EPC work.
Right, the
Yeah.
engineering, procurement, and construction for solar power plants.
Yeah. They apparently have a track record there, over 770 MW of projects completed. So that is an existing business, some underlying value. The margins from those projects could potentially offer some financial support.
That's a fair point, but surely the reputation is just shot. Wouldn't that make it hard to get new solar projects?
Oh, absolutely. The reputational damage is massive. Future clients, partners, they'll likely be very hesitant to work with a company facing such serious allegations and regulatory heat. That could really hurt their future order book, their growth prospects.
Makes sense. And what about blusmart, the company waiting for those EVs? How are they doing through all this?
They're facing their own set of challenges based on the conversation. There are reports of operations being suspended in some areas, issues with unpaid drivers, problems with customer refunds. Their future path seems heavily dependent on what that Grant Thornton audit uncovers.
Finding out where the money went, what assets are left.
Exactly. That report will be crucial for their next steps.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. As we wrap up this deep dive into the whole Gensol engineering saga, what are the really crucial takeaways here?
I think the conversation really hammers home how critical transparency is. It's especially with related party transactions, deals involving insiders or companies linked to them.
Investors need to see clearly where the money's going.
Absolutely. You need an honest view. This situation just screams that a lack of transparency can lead to disaster, severe consequences.
Definitely. And it also highlights the vital role of auditors, doesn't it?
For sure. They have a huge responsibility to stick strictly to the rules, like those PFUTP regulations, make sure financial statements are accurate, and importantly, raise red flags when they see potential problems.
Yeah. And finally, for you listening to this, as an investor, what's the lesson?
I think it's a stark reminder. Do your homework. Do your due diligence. Don't just swallow company announcements whole.
Be critical.
Yes. Critically assess the information companies put out there. Understand the risks involved before you invest your hard-earned money.
Okay, so to recap, we've looked into the dramatic fall of Gensol Engineering. It was sparked by these really serious allegations of funds being mismanaged, diverted by the promoters,
Leading to regulatory action by SEBI.
huge financial losses for over 100,000 retail investors,
And a very uncertain future for both Gensol and blusmart.
and the sheer amount of unaccounted for cash, that 262 crore, and just how wide the consequences spread, it really underlines how severe this whole thing is.
And bringing it back to you, the listener, understanding these kinds of corporate blow-ups gives you invaluable lessons.
Yeah, lessons about needing strong corporate governance
Clear financial reporting.
and the absolute necessity for investors like you to be informed, maybe a bit skeptical, and definitely cautious.
Right. Learning from cases like this can genuinely empower you to navigate the financial world with, let's say, a more critical and discerning eye.
So here's something to really chew on as we finish. What are the wider ripples from corporate actions like these? How does it affect the overall economy, the trust we all place in publicly listed companies?
Yeah, and what role do we, as individual investors, actually play in holding corporations accountable? Does our vigilance matter?
And maybe the biggest question this whole Gensol situation throws up, how well are our regulatory systems really protecting investor interests in today's incredibly complex financial markets? Lots to think about there.